In 1987, long before he began hawking emergency food buckets for use in the end times, well-known televangelist and pastor Jim Bakker had plans to expand his Christian theme park, Heritage USA. Per the Charlotte Observer, the park already featured a 52-foot water slide, Bible-based shops along a pretend main street, and a TV studio spotlighting the talk show that starred Bakker and then-wife Tammy. Bakker's vision, he told investors, included a roller coaster ride through heaven and hell, a 30,000-seat replica of London's Crystal Palace, and even a 5-story Greek-style mausoleum. Construction had already begun on 2 other mega projects, a sandcastle with a 10-story turret that would house the world's largest Wendy's restaurant, and a high-rise hotel that he called Heritage Grand Towers. If this Christian theme park scheme sounds at all familiar to you, it may be because it was a major plot point in the biopic The Eyes of Tammy Faye, which chronicles the rise of Tammy Faye Bakker and her husband Jim. The concept of a Christian resort/theme park was also parodied in the HBO series Righteous Gemstones, and show creator Danny McBride has talked pretty openly about writing plot lines inspired by real religious celebrities, events, and scandals. Anyway, 2 months after he pitched investors on this expansion, Bakker was exposed for financial crimes involving wire and mail fraud, and was also accused of sexual assault by a former ministry secretary named Jessica Hahn. Bakker contended in his book that this sexual encounter was consensual. In light of these public scandals, his plans were scrapped, and the ongoing construction was halted. Bakker was also sent to prison for 5 years, and his ministry eventually bankrupted. But that was not the end of the property he had begun to build. In 2004, Bakker's friend and fellow pastor Rick Joyner bought 52 acres of the old property for $1.8 million, then later bought 18 more acres. The hotel Bakker had built, the Heritage Grand, now serves as the headquarters for several of Joyner's ministries, including MorningStar Fellowship Church, MorningStar University, a K-12 school, a publishing house, and a conference center. But behind the polished, extravagant exterior of Joyner's sprawling ministry, new scandals are beginning to unfold. Several victims have sued MorningStar Fellowship Church in Fort Mill, South Carolina for abuse, negligence, and cover-up after a church youth leader committed acts like grooming, providing alcohol and pornography to, and sexually abusing minors. The church's lawyers filed motions to dismiss the first lawsuit, citing ecclesiastical doctrine under the First Amendment as a defense. That's right, essentially the church argued that the government can't interfere with this case because they have religious freedom. The judge obviously disagreed, saying that, quote, South Carolina courts do not inherently reject jurisdiction over church-related claims and will not extend First Amendment protection to secular activities that happen to take place under a church's roof. The court finds the ecclesiastical doctrine does not bar claims alleging defendants facilitated and overlooked sexual assaults of a teenage boy. My guest today is South Carolina attorney Randy Hood, whose firm McGowan, Hood, Felder, and Phillips LLC is representing 5 separate lawsuits against MorningStar Ministries. Here's our conversation. I know people who are listening have already heard a little bit of like the basic timeline, but there's no one better to share kind of how this all started than yourself. So talk to me just a little bit about filing that initial lawsuit against MorningStar Ministries and what prompted it and what the kind of initial response was to it.
I think in order for us to talk about that specific issue, we have to go back to the beginning. There's these children that I represent who are now 18, 19 years old. These children began with, they were all going to church there at this particular facility, MorningStar. They're 12, 13, 14 years old. And they were approached about joining a group called Young Special Forces. This was supposed to be something where it would almost be male-oriented, where you'd be working outside and you'd be developing leadership skills. And on paper, it sounds fabulous and wonderful, and the types of things that most kids would want to do. And it was going to be run by someone by the name of Erickson Lee. He was the son of Douglas Lee. Douglas Lee was the head of security for MorningStar Church. And over a period of 4 years, Erickson Lee took liberties with a number of children that involved sexual assault, sexual harassment, sexual abuse, horrendous things. Horrendous to the point that he's now doing 9 years in prison for these acts that he committed on these children. After a period of time, one of the families reached out to me, John Doe number 1, and his parents reached out to me. Very, very sweet people, kind, generous with their time, smart, and they told me a story that to most people would sound unbelievable, but to me, because I've been in this realm or this field for a particular length of time, it sounded like par for the course, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Someone gained someone's trust through some type of a religious organization. They're given trust, unfettered trust, because they're within this particular religious denomination, and it appears to be a wonderful thing on his face, but underneath everything, it's the same as it always is. There's a sexual predator
Yeah.
who is preying on underage children. It's the same thing every time. It's a sexual predator preying on children. And it doesn't matter whether it's women, men, boys, girls, whatever it is. When abuse occurs, it's always because of a predator. And predators make up about 10% of the population. And in any population, it isn't just indigenous to the United States, it's anywhere.
Yeah.
And I don't know, some people may call them a malignant narcissist. Some people may call them a psychopath. Some people may call them a sociopath. Some people may call them deranged, perverted, or whatever term you want to use. But when someone who is an adult has sexual excitement or gratification, engaging in illicit relations with a child, it's criminal. Call it anything you want to. You can put any name you want on it, but at the end of the day, it's criminal. There's a reason it's criminal, because you harm a child, you take an innocent, and you change them for the rest of their life. They can go through counseling, they can go through help with their family, they can pray, they can do all kinds of things, but at the end of the day, you're still a statistic. You're still a victim. You've still been abused, assaulted, harassed, violated, exploited, and that will be with you for the rest of your life.
Yeah. Right.
But this family comes to me, and I was very concerned about what was going on. And so I literally put it together in a couple of weeks and filed it. I've done that on a number of things. I have a case against U.S. figure skating right now with some children, and the same thing happened. Somebody came to me, and I think that sometimes there aren't changes that are made. People don't look at things harder unless there is the threat of, one, exposure, and two, monetary liability. And those two things are precipitating factors in making people do things and getting off of their butt and taking a proactive stance at eradicating some type of malignant presence or behavior. And when this family came to me, I filed it. And then there were other children that were affected. Two of them came to me immediately, and we filed theirs within about a month of the first.
Right.
And then the fourth came, and it just took them a little bit longer, and theirs was filed last week. And then when I say I've gotten a bunch of calls, I've gotten over 100 calls from different people. Not people that were necessarily violated, but that people had been at this particular school, at the CSCL school, the MorningStar University, or at the church in a youth program, or they knew of somebody. And there were just calls, not just in the United States, but internationally. It doesn't start here. It started 27 years ago as the first known case, where a young lady, it was in the news recently within the last 2 weeks, they finally got a guy extradited back from Australia. 1997, there was a church in New York called Abide, and it was a MorningStar offshoot. And there was a 26-year-old pastor and a 14-year-old girl, and the pastor went to his fellow pastors and said he had been spoken to by God, that he was supposed to make her his wife. And of course, it was endorsed by everyone. And then this guy did what 26-year-old men do, and he engaged in sexual relations with this particular 14-year-old girl. He takes off and he evades process in law enforcement for over 20 years, but they finally got it. And now he's doing time. But that's where it started. That was a MorningStar offshoot church. And there have been, and in the complaint, I have referred to it, there have been scads and scads of reports about things that have happened. And in the complaint, in the John Doe number 4 complaint, I refer to a person that they hired at one time who was a convicted sex abuser by the name of Todd Bentley. And Todd Bentley was also, and it's in my complaint, found unfit to be a pastor by his specific denomination.
In January 2020, a statement was put out by a leadership panel from Line of Fire Ministries regarding Todd Bentley and signed by Dr. Michael Brown, who, ironically in 2024, also faced allegations of sexual misconduct, Dr. Joseph Matera, Dr. James W. Gall, Dr. Jane Hammond, Bishop Harry Jackson, and Dr. Don Finto. A portion of the statement read, "We love Todd and believe that he has been supernaturally gifted by God, and our highest joy would be to see Todd coming before God and the community of believers in humility and repentance, openly desiring help to get his life fully healed and surrendered to Jesus." They continue, "Sadly, we see no signs of true lasting repentance. Instead, we see a steady pattern of compromised behavior, including credible accusations of adultery, sexting, including the exchanging of nude pictures or videos, vulgar language, and substance abuse." They continued, "In our view, this disqualifies Todd from public ministry until such time that he has demonstrated true lasting fruits of repentance, which would include the breaking of these long-term sinful habits, public acknowledgement of his sin without equivocation, including asking forgiveness of those he sinned against, and submission to local church leadership until trust has been rebuilt. This would likely take a period of years." Well, in 2024, this happened.
He was brought back by MorningStar recently to preach, and he's still there. There's an attitude, and it isn't just MorningStar. It's not just this church. You see it everywhere, where there is a mentality that almost seems like they're superior to everyone else, and they can decide to do what they want to do because it's their church,
Right.
and they're going to run it the way they want to run it. And there is a very, very pervasive old white man leadership structure that seems to perpetuate all of this. Once in a while, you'll see something a little different. The offenders sometimes, they're almost always young, but the policies and the procedures and the hierarchy and the running of the church and deciding who gets to do what, that all comes from an older generation who's making decisions.
Right.
And in this particular realm, you can't have people making decisions that do not have their fingertip on the pulse of the latest way to prevent harm to children. Because if you are not doing that, then you're setting yourself up and you're facilitating an environment of abuse.
Well, it sounds like the abusive mentality was baked into the foundation of the ministry from what you're describing. It sounds like 20 plus years ago, they kind of established how they handle these types of situations in-house.
Well, the thing is, and this is going to dovetail into some of the things you're talking about, which is really super disturbing. But there is this process they have called Matthew 18. And in Matthew 18, it talks about being able to confront your accuser and there needs to be more than one witness and that kind of thing. And it's called a Matthew 18 process. There are some churches that adhere to a Matthew 18 process. Well, you know, and I know, first, predatory behavior is done in isolation.
Mm-hmm.
They cull the calf from the herd. They isolate them. And these are things that are done behind closed doors. They're done in secrecy. Yeah. They're done with threats of intimidation, coercion. And so you don't have witnesses to a grown man offending against a minor age child.
Yeah. This comes up
you don't
all
have
the time. Yeah.
Doesn't exist. And so the Matthew 18 process, it doesn't work. You're hiding behind something that they claim to be ecclesiastical in nature, but they're taking something out of context so that they can protect themselves and their fiefdom.
I want to remind my listeners that in 2021, I actually had an in-depth conversation with respected scholar and theologian Scott McKnight about Matthew 18 and other verses that have been used to silence victims, and I want to include a segment of that conversation right here.
Who's going to benefit if we use Matthew 18? The church. The church has to be seen then as a group that's protecting itself rather than seeking the truth. The misuse of Bible verses, for instance, I'll never forget Laura, I think it was Laura, said to me, they're now appealing to 1 Timothy that you can't accuse an elder if you don't have 2 or 3 witnesses. And I said, this is ridiculous. How many men sexually abuse a woman in public so that there are other witnesses? I mean, it's almost never, right? The other side of this is the honest irony of it was, I mean, it's the hypocrisy, a lack of insight, however you want to describe it, is we had at that time 4 or 5 women who were all telling a similar story. Is that not 2 or 3 witnesses? The use of that verse was done exclusively to silence the women. Who gained by the use of that verse?
Remember, you can find my full episode with Scott McKnight on this topic in the show notes of this episode, but let's get back to my conversation with Randy Hood.
My Christ, my God, is a loving God. He protected children. He protected widows. He walked with the poor. He surrounded himself with beggars, thieves, and prostitutes. That's my Christ. That's my God. He protects children. And in the realm of this situation, having not just this church, any church who insists on having multiple witnesses for someone who's offending against a child, it's not absurd. It's worse than absurd.
No.
It's impossible. And what they're doing is they're setting up a process by which you can never get rid of the bad apple.
Right.
And they've set it up so that that never happens. And it's usually someone who's in a position of authority, someone who's a youth pastor. This is not just somebody. This is somebody that's taking care of children because they've applied for it and somebody has said, yes, it's okay. It's okay. Listen, I've got a case right now where a little girl sat on a man over 70, sat on his lap, and he fondled her and played with her vaginal area. I deposed him and asked him, well, sir, there's a camera showing this. How do you explain your hands got there? And he goes, oh, my hands wander. I'm getting older. My hands move around by themselves. But he pled guilty to it.
Yeah.
And so there is an apologist behavior that is, if this was corporate America, none of these places would be in business because the apologist behavior would not be tolerated because there's a bottom line. Yeah. You have to make money and you have to be able to continue to exist because the product you're putting out is you're able to make money. You're not going to go under. And what's happening in the church is they are basically protecting their ability to generate tithes and offerings. And so they don't want this to come out because it affects membership. At the end of the day, it all comes back to money.
Yeah.
It all comes back to money, which is absurd. And it's gross and it's morbid.
Yeah.
And it's pathetic. But it all comes back to money.
Well, I'm curious about the 2 arguments that I've seen the ministry put forward. One of which, both I rolled my eyes at. One of which was that he wasn't an employee of the church because he wasn't paid. Even though anybody who's attended church for any period of time knows that a large amount of the staff is not paid. Like there's a lot of people in ministry positions who don't receive a paycheck. But the other piece that I was shocked by, and I've talked to hundreds of survivors, and a lot of times the church has how they handle things in-house. but they know it doesn't fly in the real world. That's why they try to keep things in-house. The other argument they made was that they had this ecclesiastical doctrine that prohibits the government from interfering with how they handled this situation, which basically means due to freedom of religion, we can handle the abuse of a child in-house however we want. The government has no part in this. Was that an argument that shocked you when that came back, or was it something that you've seen before and is more common than people would think?
It's in every single case involving the Catholic Church, the Protestant Church, a Jewish synagogue, or any other church of any type of religion in the United States of America. You're going to have a First Amendment defense that is going to be interposed in every single case that is filed.
That's always first step?
First step. It's, First Amendment of the United States, separation of church and state. And so the United States government cannot infringe on church polity, P-O-L-I-T-Y. There are a number of different factors, but the way I look at it, when you come down to it, abusing a child has nothing to do with ecclesiastical doctrine. Improper monitoring, once you know that somebody's giving vapes or providing pornography or that type of things to kids, that's way outside. They're giving alcohol to them. Nope. you gotta do more. And because once we all know that when you see smoke, there's usually fire. You can't just stick your head in the sand and say, we're a church. This is all church. Well, no, there's now a recognition, and there has been a recognition for many years now. First, it was slow, but now it's picking up steam that when there's sex abuse involved, you have to look at this the way that you would a secular organization.
Yeah.
Is a church daycare going to be treated than a secular daycare? Yes, from a religious component. If someone is preaching to a child and they get offended, too bad. Can't touch that.
Yeah.
But if you've got somebody in there who has been kind of, letting kids sit on his lap, and he's an older guy, and it's really bizarre, and you let it go, and then he gets caught molesting a child, well, too bad. That ain't ecclesiastical anymore, because once someone knew or became aware, or they didn't have policies and procedures, or they didn't have supervision, they didn't have monitoring, they didn't have training, then you're outside of the ecclesiastical doctrine.
Yeah.
And that's in most states. And in the United States Supreme Court has actually recognized that as well.
As we begin to wrap up the conversation, Attorney Hood shared some helpful perspectives on churches in the Apostolic movement that came from one of his trusted experts. And I think this mentality exists in many other denominations. He talked about the notion that some religious groups have that since God is in control over everything, we don't need to worry about anything.
One of my experts is a fabulous guy. He's a very, very, very educated, smart, savvy, and is a pastor and feels strongly about, obviously, about his faith. But he has said, and this has nothing to do with any case that I'm doing, this is just his general knowledge and what he said, that in the denominations involving prophecy or, direct translation from certain parts of the Bible, speaking in tongues, handling snakes, the Pentecostals, the Assemblies of God, and in, this case, MorningStar, where they think that they have a direct access to God. We all have direct access to God, but where they feel that he is talking to them frequently on a daily basis, and their mindset, the Pentecost, the Assemblies of God, their mindset is God takes care of everything. God takes care of everything.
Yeah.
And in that type of a mentality, it doesn't require predatory thought processes or trying to preserve the church or anything like that. That's just somebody that is almost not recognizing that evil is existing in the world, because it does. And in a situation like that, you're simply just sticking your head in the sand. And you're just like, oh, it's not going to happen here because God's not going to let it happen.
Here's why that mentality is so dangerous. The lack of safeguards creates a wide open hunting ground for predators.
God gave us free will and choice. we're sinners. We're human. He gave us free will and choice. Some people choose to make that choice in evil ways. And when they do that, and if they're within your denomination and they choose to do it within the confines of your church, and you think God's going to take care of it because you're not going to put, policies and procedures, or you're not going to put backstops in place to prevent this, well, it's going to happen. Predators go where children are. That's why coaches and sports organizations with kids and schools and daycares and churches are the hunting grounds for predators. Their prey are children. So where can they get access to children where there's less supervision than one-on-one with a parent? They hunt where they find their prey. Churches are prime hunting grounds for a predator.
I know, obviously, when it comes to the argument of this, kind of religious immunity, this ecclesiastical doctrine, the judge obviously slapped that down pretty quickly. I guess, you mentioned there's 3 lawsuits that were filed, 2 more that were filed just recently. What's next? Like, do you see this? Do you have any sense of where this is going? And, do you feel optimistic about the outcome of these lawsuits that are filed right now?
My firm, I've got 20 lawyers. I don't get involved. My lawyers, we don't get involved in any kind of lawsuit unless we feel very, very confident that we're going to be successful. That doesn't mean that we win every time, but it means that we win the overwhelming majority of times. And when I say we won, most cases don't go to trial. Most cases get resolved by ways of a settlement. But in this particular case, what's going to happen? They have filed a motion for reconsideration. So they filed for the judge to reconsider her denial of their motion to dismiss. If she denies it, then we start we've already exchanged discovery, meaning we've sent written requests for information back and forth. That's what happens in any lawsuit. That will be answered. And after that is answered, then both sides have the opportunity to start deposing people. And that's when the real information comes out. Because you're under oath. And if you perjure yourself and then you're able to show somebody committed perjury, that's a crime.
Yeah.
And that's when real things come out. Because what I will tell you, I have dealt with all types and all sorts in my 32 years of practice, and I've seen some horrific, horrific things. But most of the lawyers, 98, 99% of the lawyers that are involved in these cases are there to defend their clients. They're going to do whatever they have to. They're going to go up to the line, but most 99% will not cross that ethical line. They're just not going to do it. And so when they see something and it's bad, they have to turn it over. They usually turn it over. Now, they may bury it in a big stack of documents, hope you don't find it, but they produce it.
Yeah.
If they know somebody's going to lie, they're not going to put them up. They're not going to let them testify.
Yeah.
And if they do know that they have lied, then they've got an ethical quandary themselves, because if they then allow that to be perpetuated upon the court, then they could lose their license. Most lawyers are not going to put their license at risk for a client who's paying them an hourly fee when they have a bunch of other clients paying them an hourly fee.
Yeah.
And so, if the truth usually comes out, sometimes it doesn't, it usually comes out.
Yeah.
And, at the end of the day, the way that my firm looks at things and the way that I look at things, if we resolve it on the way to the courthouse, great. If we don't resolve it on the way to the courthouse, well, then 12 jurors in York County are going to decide the fate of each one of these cases.
Right.
And we have 5 to try. I'd like to try them all.
Right.
It's, it's one of those things where I am on the side of children who were abused, and there's no question they were abused. That person has pled guilty. His dad is the head of security.
Yeah.
This has been going on since the early 2000s within the MorningStar framework, and even earlier than that in a sister church where they had some type of management control. This is untenable. And the response has been, we'll take care of it. Don't call law enforcement. I'll try that case all day, every day, anywhere.
Yeah. Randy, I appreciate you taking time to share about this case. And I know there's countless like it that you've dealt with over your time in law. And I know doing this show, I've talked to probably hundreds of victims at this point who have experienced stories similar to the one that is covered in this case and these 5 different lawsuits. For someone who's hearing about you for the first time, what's the best place for people to contact you or your firm if they're in an area where you do practice and they have a similar experience or story that they like to share, maybe pursue legal action?
We have a national reach because of our mass tort unit. And I have lawyers that I work with in different states. And, you know, there's no way you can do these things and stay within the confines of a state. Now, I'm not licensed in another state, but I have somebody else work with me in another state, or I refer them to the person that knows what they're doing. I know who to go to in other states because we're the people. I'm in something called the Victims Bar, the National Crime Victim Bar Association. And the people that are within that specific organization, we all represent people who are victims of crimes. And the large majority of those are sexual abuse or sexual assault. But they can find us in our if they just put Randy Hood attorney in Google, they're going to find me because there's a lot of stuff on there. But,
Gotcha.
you know, but it's McGowanhood.com, McGowanhood.com. I'm also on TikTok. I've got a TikTok presence. I got to give you a 30-second story. Just 30 seconds.
Sure.
You know, 6 months ago, you know, I mean, I might look at TikTok once in a while. I'm a 62-year-old man, you know, I mean, you know, people laugh at me for being on there. And I had this case and I saw a case that was amazingly similar to my case. And in that case, a guy who owned a Chick-fil-A in Ohio drove down to Rutherford, North Carolina, and got a hold of a child, 14-year-old girl, 15-year-old girl, or a boy. I can't remember what sex it was arrested and all that kind of stuff. Well, it just so happened 6 weeks before that, I had a similar case where a guy who owned a Chick-fil-A had been caught with a 14-year-old boy by the boy's mother. And so I did a TikTok because I was like, this is really bizarre.
A Chick-fil-A franchise owner out of Ohio is currently in custody.
The Chick-fil-A owner from Ohio is not the only Chick-fil-A owner that's engaged in SA activity with a child. Approximately 6 weeks ago, a Chick-fil-A owner from Lancaster, South Carolina, engaged in this type of conduct with a 14-year-old boy from Fort Mill, South Carolina. I'm the lawyer for that family. I represent that young man. This is crazy. It has to stop.
I've now got almost 2 million views of that. It went viral.
Yeah.
The first TikTok I'd ever done, did it in 45 seconds, and it went viral. Wow. And it went viral because there was a particular person who picked it up. I mean, she picked it up. I did it she picked it up and she reposted it. And when she reposted it, well then, you know, I think I went from 15 followers to 5,000 followers.
Wow.
You know, it was crazy. It was insane. But, you know, we're here to help people, and there just aren't enough lawyers who know what they're doing. Because I mean, when you look at our motion to oppose their motion to dismiss, it's 25 pages, and it's extraordinarily technical. And there are ways you have to argue, and there are things you have to plead, and there are things you must discover to be able to thread the needle to get around some of these landmine defenses that are absolutely deadly if you do not plead around them. And so, and you're not trying to do something that isn't allowed. You're not trying to do something unethical or not fair. You're simply taking the facts you have and you're putting them in the light that allows you to maintain your lawsuit as opposed to getting tossed out. And a lot of that, it doesn't even have to be somebody that's it isn't whether you're a good lawyer or bad lawyer. It's about whether you understand the actual intricacies of cases within this realm of religious sex abuse.
Well, I definitely encourage anybody listening to go check you guys out, and it's certainly something I'll keep in mind. I've got a couple lawyers I've made friendships with over the last 5 years of doing the show, 4 years of doing the show, and I'm constantly trying to find people in different states. So it's great knowing you guys have a national reach. But thank you again for taking the time to do this and for giving me more time than I asked for. I really, really genuinely appreciate it.
Listen, we appreciate you, man. And, at the end of the day, you're doing a good thing because you're changing the world one person at a time. And it's all about exposure, and it's all about knowledge. Knowledge is power. And if people begin to understand, and it takes one person to start to make a change. And if one person goes to someone at the head of their church and says, hey, I saw this isn't right, and then they just make sure that it's investigated or taken care of, you may save a child.
Right.
And we all have that obligation, duty, and responsibility. If we see anything that is affecting a child, we must get involved. We are not allowed to sit back and do nothing. We cannot be that way. That is not who we are as a country. We cannot do that.